Just to welcome everyone and just to give a brief background on the purpose of the webinar. So the lots of a lot of attention to clean technologies is growing in policy, business, and trade circles. However, the slow global decarbonization has led some developed countries to implement domestic measures that will expedite the clean energy transition. One example is the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. As such, the Western Cape Department of Economic Development and Tourism has taken the initiative to support businesses with various measures to adapt and comply with carbon taxes. So a few months ago, DEDAT appointed Tomorrow Matters Now to assist us with the development of an awareness campaign about the importance of reducing carbon footprints and the implications of CBAM. As the department, we are delighted to have them on board. And this is the first webinar in a series of dialogue sessions organized by TOMA on behalf of DEDAT to support businesses that are susceptible to the impact CBAM and to the impact of CBAM and similar regulations. The purpose of this webinar is to provide a platform for key stakeholders and experts to educate businesses and share information. So without any ado, I'd like to hand over to Toma to officially start the proceedings. I'm going to be staying on throughout the webinar series, just lest there are any questions directly for me or for the department. But again, a warm welcome to everyone, and I'm looking forward to a very insightful session. Thank you, Joe. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Fatso. Really appreciate it. So again, good morning, everyone. I'm Jay Sheila Rutgert from TOMA-Now, and I will be your moderator for today. For those of you who don't know, TOMA-Now is a leading innovative green economy consultancy that supports high-impact companies, industry bodies, and NGOs to grow by developing green and circular economy strategies for sustainable solutions. As Katso has just mentioned, we have recently been appointed by the Western Cape government, DEDAT, to support them on creating awareness around CBAM and unpacking potential areas of support the Western Cape government can offer exporters impacted by CBAM. So let's get into it. What is CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and what does it actually entail? So today's webinar is going to be highly interactive. In a short minute, I'll introduce our panel of experts, but I want to actually encourage you to use this opportunity for this interactive session by using the chat as well as Q&A boxes to be able to add any questions that you have, and we'll be able to actually pose it to our expert panel as well. So let's get this started. Well, CBAM essentially introduces a carbon price on imports to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prevent carbon leakage. It's something that is specifically put in place as an environmental consideration. So the way that it works is that exporters must comply with CBAM emission reporting as well as financial requirements. South African businesses could face compliance challenges due to high export costs, compliance burdens, a lack of emission data, and reduced market access. And that's the reason that we're having these types of sessions, to be able to empower and create the awareness that's needed behind us. Up until now, everyone has been specifically talking about the EU and the CBAM behind it. However, it's not actually limited to the EU. Other countries that are currently lining up in terms of their CBAM requirements include, at the moment, Japan, Australia, Canada, and the UK, and they're currently considering implementing their CBAM policies pending how things are going as far as the EU one goes. So let's talk about the EU one, and this is the one that we're going to focus on in this webinar in particular, because it allows us to be able to unpack a few practical considerations that go with this. So the way that it works is that the EU CBAM is implemented in two phases. The first one is the transitional phase, which started in October 2023, and it has no financial obligations, but really emphasizes the reporting side of things. And then there's the definitive phase, which will introduce a carbon tax and that actually starts in January 2026. So right now, in the initial phase, as far as the EU CBAM goes, the impacted sectors include iron and steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. But the way that it actually stands is that we understand that there are plans to include all sectors under the EU emissions trading system. So as a consequence, this means that we're expecting more and more sectors to be unpacked. I'm just going to pause very quickly to say or to ask all participants if you would kindly ensure that you're muted at all times, just to allow the panelists the opportunity to be able to express whatever it is that we need as far as the session goes. There'll be plenty of opportunity in terms of Q&A, and that's something that we highly encourage as far as this particular session goes. There's no specific presentations or anything like that, but it's actually more emphasized on interaction than anything else. So without further ado, to help me to decipher this and more on CBAM, please welcome my panel of experts. In terms of the panel of experts, we have firstly Soitame Meimale, who is an economist on sustainable growth at the Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, TIPS. He works focusing on global climate change policies and trade, designing climate-compatible value chains for carbon-intensive industries in South Africa and Africa. He also works extensively on the just transition in South Africa. Then next up, we have Vinesh Maharaj, who is a director with the Operations Transformation Department of PwC South Africa, and has been working with clients in the energy, utilities, resources, and industrial manufacturing industries since 1995. He's the South African lead of the Smart Manufacturing and Net Zero practices. His experience covers a wide range of areas, with specific expertise being obtained in industrial automation and control, manufacturing execution systems, and IT/OT integration. Vinesh is also a registered professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa, and is certified director with the Institute of Directors. He serves on the executive committee and as an advisor to the board of directors of the Society for Automation, Instrumentation, Mechatronics, and Computer Engineering. Next up, we have Karen Bosman. Karen is educated in international economics, law, and policy. She's from Wesgro, and at Wesgro, her focus includes the competitiveness of the Western Cape economy in a changing international economic context, with particular focus on international trade, investment, and tourism. Karen previously spent time working in Washington, D.C., where her research focused on international trade and investment law, regional integration, and enabling legal frameworks in Africa. She has also worked as a legislative advisor in the South African Parliament and at a commercial law firm in Cape Town. She holds degrees in law, in political science, philosophy, and economics from Stellenbosch University, and a master's in international economic law from Georgetown University in the US. And last but not least, we have Rosalind DeSantos. Rosalind is the Group Energy Manager for Impact, one of the leading paper and plastics packaging manufacturing businesses in Southern Africa, as well as the leading recycler of recovered paper and plastic. Her area of expertise is sustainability, and she works mainly in energy, carbon, and climate change. Although she has diverse experience in her career over 15 years, Rosalind has held various roles in her career in South Africa, including head of Group of Real Estate Services Sustainability for Liberty Holdings, as well as account management on an international donor-funded energy efficiency program, senior consultant for power and infrastructure solutions, technical expertise for South Africa Bank's carbon trading team and carbon project development. Rosalind is also the director of the South African National Energy Association, where her main focus is increasing youth and female participation in the energy industry. She is also a council member and treasurer for the Energy Intensive Users Group, and represents the group on the World Energy Council South Africa Member Committee. Rosalind holds an MBA with distinction from UCT, the UCT Graduate School of Business, and an MSc in Metallurgical Engineering and a BSc in Chemical Engineering from the University of Witwatersrand. And she's a certified energy manager of the Association of Energy Engineers. So no doubt you can see that we have quite a illustrious panel to help us to actually navigate the space. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. So a quick hello to everybody. Thank you, Saitama. We can see you. Rosalind, we can see you as well. Just waiting for Karan. There we go, as well as Vinesh. Perfect. Thanks, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for giving us your time today. Really appreciate it, especially as we start navigating the space, which is no doubt quite complex. So let's start with you, Saitama. Can you give us an overview of CBAM and the driving forces behind its introduction by the EU? How does it align with global climate action strategies, in your opinion?
Thanks for the introduction and the brief introduction on CBAM. I think as much as I think you've already touched on that from my side, there's a lot to unpack, but from my side, I just want to highlight a few things. So as much as we've been up to date now with the latest developments in the CBAM space recently, but what we know is that the CBAM, now they're called the border carbon adjustments to just include other mechanisms introduced elsewhere. They have been in the space for some time, and at TIPS we've been tracking some of those developments in that space and trying to analyze some of the risks and the issues that might come with the introduction of this border carbon adjustments. So, but just coming back to the EU one, so what we've seen is that the EU one is one, is the one of a kind, which is already in the transition phase. Of course, I think now there are some, debates already happening, in Europe around whether they should postpone the implementation phase of CBAM or not. But what we see is that in the South African case, we know for a fact that I think even maybe the panelists might also add on what I've already said, is that there are issues of lack of readiness within South African firms. So we know this because we've done analysis to understand which industries or value chains will actually be impacted in the country, and one of the key ones that will be highly impacted is iron and steel and aluminium. Of course, fertilizers and cement will be impacted, but not to the same extent as iron and steel in the South African case. And what we see is that there's lack of readiness, and I think this platform is I have to commend DEDAT for taking forward in terms of creating awareness around the issues of EU CBAM. But what we've seen is that a lot of firms in South Africa, even if you take it to the global south, there hasn't been a lot of awareness about BCAs or the EU CBAM in general, or the UK CBAM that is also in the process of being introduced. So there has been a general lack of awareness around the introduction of these mechanisms, and in South Africa, there's some of these firms are not prepared, especially those who will be impacted. So of course we can highlight some of these issues maybe as we interact in the webinar. But at the moment, I just wanted to highlight that the BCAs in general, or the EU CBAM, has been introduced in the space for some time now. I think in the late 2010s, and now it looks like we haven't been prepared to deal with such issues. But I think we're not that late yet, so we still have time to start engaging and prepare for the introduction of these PCAs, locally. And I think, because there's also diplomatic mission that needs to be taken. So globally, as well as especially looking in the global south, there should be a need for collaboration to engage on such issues. So it's not just a South African issue, but it's a global and global south issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that in terms of the context, especially in terms of the readiness and what's happening also from a diplomatic perspective. But using that and the point around the awareness, I'd like to actually head over to Vinesh and basically get a sense of what should South African businesses be doing right now. What are the most immediate CBAM deadlines, and what practical first steps should companies take to prepare accordingly, in your opinion?
Thank you, Jeshila, and good morning, everyone. So Jeshila, the first thing is, I'm glad that this webinar is creating awareness about this important, I would say, legislative requirement. And what businesses need to do is to take it very, very seriously. That's the first thing, right? Do not bury your head in the sand, because even though I think the minister spoke last time that they're going to try and negotiate that we don't have to comply with CBAM, as my colleague said earlier, this is a global south issue. Excluding one country or another country may not be practical. But it also fits into the broader whole net zero conversation and our nationally defined targets, for emissions reduction anyway. So apart from being compliant, well, it's not even compliance, it's actually paying a tax. It's actually the right thing to do anyway. So what businesses should start doing is looking at the entire supply chain and starting to calculate what emissions are forming part of their total emissions. Now, by definition, there's three main categories, which is your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 being your direct emissions, which is basically everything that's directly related to producing whatever product or service you create. Scope 2 is in energy, electricity or gas. And scope 3 is the most complicated one. That is everything you do with your upstream and downstream value chain, which is mainly a lot of procurement information and stuff you don't have control over, because these are your suppliers and your customers. So you have to now get all of that together, because that all affects your scope 3 scorecard. So it's quite complicated, and the sooner you start, the better it is. I'll just stop for there now. I guess we can talk about later a bit more. Okay.
Perfect. I think that's a brilliant context to actually leave it on. So I'd like to actually hand over to Karen at this point, and to actually look at it from a regional perspective. So Wesgro is the official tourism, trade and investment promotion agency for the Western Cape province. Could you speak to the significance of measures such as the EU CBAM from the point of view of export and investment promotion, and also maybe to kind of cap it off with, from a Western Cape perspective, how aware are local businesses of CBAM, and what are the key concerns that you're hearing?
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting us, and to DEDAT for showing support for business in this transition phase. I think it's very important that government is seen to be supporting businesses through complicated waters that we are in at the moment. So I just wanted to say thank you and commend everybody. So from our point of view, so Wesgro is the official tourism, trade and investment promotion agency for the Western Cape and Cape Town. And what that means practically is we need to promote the province and the city for foreign direct investment and local direct investment. So that's helping bringing companies to actually set up in the province, in the region, and then promoting our exports into foreign markets. So facilitating, helping exporters getting products into market. And measures like this, and again, I think we've noted the fact that the CBAM is one of many, but I think it's the most concrete measure with a price attached to it that we have at the moment. So measures like this really are, from an export point of view and an investment point of view, what we need to be doing is constantly assessing the competitiveness of the region. And when you have something like this, you're not only looking at investment destination competitiveness, but your export competitiveness. And what this does is it puts carbon emissions sort of squarely within that bracket of economic competitiveness. So where you want to attract an investment to come and a company to come and set up, you need to be cognizant of the fact that we have a free trade agreement with the EU. It's one of our largest exporting regions. A lot of companies come here in order to export into the EU. So, and a lot of companies have also made commitments to decarbonize their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, as well as those companies that are now falling under a number of EU regulations in this regard. So the ability to provide clean energy at a cost-effective price to companies is immediately becomes an investment attraction competitiveness issue. And the same goes obviously for the exporters that we already have, the companies that are already exporting. There it's again the ability of being able to not only decarbonize, but that whole ecosystem of accounting, monitoring, verification, the financial mechanisms, the access to the right professional services, financiers, legal people, consultants. It's a whole ecosystem that's required, and then it's a whole legislative and regulatory minefield in order to make this all work. And as we know, with liberalization of the energy market, so it's not fast. It's not a quick process, but these regulations have come upon us. We could say quickly, or we could say slowly, depending on how you're looking at it. But we need to be cognizant of what it means in the bigger picture, beyond just the company's ability to decarbonize, but as a region competitively. Obviously, the main reason being the carbon intensity of our grid. So understanding what businesses need, understanding fundamentally we need access to clean energy, understanding that we can't always, a lot of the CBAM specific production facilities are too big. They need the grid, and then understanding what we can do. Obviously, advocating. I think the EU has shown us recently that they are open to simplifying. I think there's an announcement coming out today, if I'm not mistaken, around simplification processes. So constant engagement, but it needs to be constructive. We need to understand what exactly our challenges are. I think the reporting has come out as one of the biggest challenges at this point. We were worried about the cost of it, but the cost of the reporting and the cost of the monitoring is really excessive and overly burdensome. So in the long run, we need to understand that this is going to become a normal operating part of business. And so the faster we can support business with the ability to do this, or the quicker we can, as a destination, attract investment and remain competitive in the export market. I think just to add on to that, to add on to that, you also attract the type of companies that support that competitiveness. So obviously, in the Western Cape, having been very proactive in terms of attracting green energy companies and the ecosystem that goes with that has helped a lot. I think I'll leave it there. Maybe just to add that there are a number of other regulatory measures, including the Corporate Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, that is sort of quite rapidly proliferating the need for companies to be able to account for their carbon emissions and show a reduction over time. So again, the CBAM is one thing, but there is a shift towards being able to do this.
Thanks, Karen. Quite a few gems that you've just laid on us there. I definitely take away the points in terms of the energy side, the onerous burden in terms of specifically reporting and everything that's associated with that. And I think that's actually quite a good segue to Rosalind. Impact is currently not yet impacted by the list of industries that are coming up, but there's this constant discussion around the need to prepare, especially because there's so much that's expected within this landscape. Can you maybe share with us your point of view as to what is actually needed for us to be able to effectively take the next steps? And before you unmute yourself, I would like to encourage the webinar participants to add any questions that you might have, any concerns specifically, so that we can pose it to our panel of experts as well. Rosalind, please go ahead.
Sure. Morning, everyone. Thanks for giving me a little bit of your time. Maybe the easiest way is to talk about how we prepared. So we made sure we had all of the right expertise in the room. We made sure that we understood exactly what was happening with CBAM. And as you said, we're quite fortunate. We're not in the initial 6 commodities, for which it's very, very impactful for many businesses in South Africa, specifically the steel and aluminium sectors. biggest worry comes in phase 2, because at least this first phase has had a transitionary period where these businesses have been able to go through the regulations. And talking to Hulaman on the sidelines of the last CBAM event, they estimate it probably took them about 2 weeks of dedicated work to really understand what was in there. And then started putting together the data collection that they needed to draw the information that they would require to do the reporting. We're quite concerned that in phase 2, when more commodities come online, it will just be accepted that everybody knows and understands this reporting. And to be clear, it is different from South Africa and South African carbon tax in the way that they've drawn the boundary on the different emissions. So our concern is we just required to start paying immediately, specifically looking at chemicals and polymers in the second phase. The EU tax workshop was quite lovely in that at least we got to hear direct from the EU that paper and paper mills haven't been included due to the complexity with benchmarking, and that we know well because there's not a paper mill in the world that runs the same as another. It's very, very product specific in terms of how you use energy as well as process specific. In terms of how the boundary is drawn, I mean, we're very well set up at the moment for South African carbon tax, which is just scope 1. And as Vinesh was saying, those are the direct emissions. If we put like a big glass dome over all of our factories, what we catch coming up into the big glass dome, that would be our scope 1 emissions. And we know about those, we report on those. At the moment, we're doing international reporting, although we are seeing higher tiers of reporting coming in with DEFI, with both country-specific emission factors and site-specific emission factors. And that's also a good question, which emission factors will we be using for what reporting? And we're seeing increasing divergence in that. So different factors for different requirements, and how to keep it all consistent and look like you're presenting a consistent picture, which absolutely we are, because we are sharing the same information. But when factors keep changing, it looks like maybe the underlying information is changing, which isn't the case at all. Also, one of the, I guess, good things about CBAM is because it's meant to drive global emission reductions, you can actually get a discount on your CBAM price with your local carbon taxation pricing. You do that calculation at the end. Is not, however, the best option, because at the moment carbon pricing in the EU is sitting at 90 euros, so probably around about 2,000 rand a ton. And we know that in South Africa, for 2026, we're looking at 308 or only a 46 Rand effective tax rate. So it's taking off a very, very small part of that burden. So really, I'd encourage business to understand exactly where they are. Also going back to the point around emissions, when Hulaman did their liability for CBAM, they've actually got scope 1, scope 2, and a small portion of scope 3. So it's not their full scope 3 and it's not their full supply chain. So it's understanding very clearly where the boundary is drawn so that you don't have more emissions in than perhaps you need to. Yeah, and then pushing decarbonization as much as possible. But as we found out from that session with the EU team, not through renewable energy certificates, only through other instruments like listed offsets, like certified emission reductions or voluntary emission reductions. But nothing that's not working in a clear standard. They're not looking for any emission reductions that aren't certified by significant audit process and teams before they're listed. So mostly the certified market emission reductions are very, very good quality VERs. Sheila, I hope that helps. I can say more, but I don't want to say everything.
I can see that. That's brilliant. There's so many things that I can pick up from what you've described. And I think that whole thing about data validation and being able to be ready from an audit trail perspective is quite key. But I'm going to actually take a pause for a minute because I do actually still have a very long list of questions, but I do notice that we're getting more and more questions from the chat coming in. So I'm going to quickly actually segue to the chat. We have a question on the first question is, South Africa introduced carbon tax in 2019. Given what is said about the definitive phase, it implies that South African companies might be subjected to double taxation. As far as I'm aware, this is not the case, but I don't know if Saitama, you want to come in to add on to this? And maybe just clarify how that works in terms of the declared emissions, what we're doing here as far as the carbon tax side goes, and then how that actually works in terms of the certificates that are generated in turn.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is true. It's not we're not going to be double taxed. So as part of the EU CBAM legislation, they are actually encouraging. So one of the other objectives is to encourage, countries or jurisdictions around the world to introduce carbon tax, right? So at the moment, South Africa has introduced the carbon tax, and when, for example, you're going to be paying the CBAM tax or the buying CBAM certificates when the CBAM come, in 2026, depending whether they're going to postpone that, from some of the latest news that we're waiting for today. But the thing is that we're not going to be double taxed because the tax that you have paid in your jurisdiction of operation, which is in this case South Africa, you have to prove that you've paid the local carbon tax, and they will deduct it from the EU CBAM, tax or the CBAM charge, right? But from that, I think there has been some concerns from my side with regards to the carbon tax, and I think there's, I saw another question regarding if whether we should increase the carbon tax or not, right? My opinion, I think from being engaged in the space and doing some analysis is that the best way to actually, in a way, move away from paying a higher CBAM charge, because we know that at the moment the EU ETS, price or carbon pricing is ranging around $80 to $100 per ton of emitted emissions, and in the South African case we have around less than $10 at the moment, right? So from that you can see that there's a huge shortfall there, and I'm not speaking about in effective terms here. So, but if you're gonna take it to effective terms, so in the EU, they're looking forward into phasing down the free allowances, right? So some sort of discounts that the EU firms are actually getting in terms of paying tax. In South Africa, we have those. So at the moment, they are ranging around 95%, right? Especially in some of the affected, firms like iron and steel and aluminium, right? Of course, there has been a discussion document around lowering the free allowances to at least 60%, right? Getting a discount of 60% from the carbon tax that you're actually paying, right? So in that case, when you look at the free allowance reduction or the trajectory in the South African case, and looking at it from a European perspective, you see that they're going to phase it down. Then it means that basically you're gonna get a discount locally, but internationally you're not gonna get a discount. You end up paying more price, on carbon based on whatever, the price is at, based on the EU, emission trading scheme. So from, I think a short answer, just giving, that background is that I think from my side we should increase it, but increasing it, we don't just have to increase it, we need to increase it with recycling mechanism. So of course, this is a conditions conversation, especially if you're engaging with the national treasury around increasing the carbon tax and including concepts such as ring fencing on recycling mechanism, right? But I think at the moment we should be engaging more on increasing the carbon tax so that we can cover the huge shortfall that is going to be going into the EU coffers, and later on, and we know at the moment is not quite clear whether the EU will send back the money to us to support us in terms of decarbonization, or is actually just gonna help the EU firms, right? So I mean, there's a whole debate, but I will just leave it there. I see Vanesh wanted to add something there.
Yeah,
with regards to
that's perfect. And you already alluded to another question that came up on the Q&A, which was, what is the EU going to do with all the money that's being collected? But I know, Vinesh, we've had this as a conversation offline before. I'm quite keen to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I just want to support what Thomas said, right? Because now, in 2026 is when our carbon taxes get renewed, although now it is projected for 308, like Rosalind said, right? But this is at the same time when the CBAM certificates have to be purchased. So there's congruence between these two timelines, which may or may not be coincidental. But because you can claim back your local carbon taxes from the CBAM mechanism, those companies that are exporting, there could be a perverse incentive for the South African government to now increase carbon taxes to those companies that are exporting to ring fence and repatriate as much of those carbon taxes into our South African coffers instead of handing it over to the EU, like what someone said, right? So at least then we have control over the money and we can help green our grid and do whatever else. So we're not sure what Treasury will do, but as stated, we have one of the lowest effective carbon taxes in the world. It's going to impact us. So maybe the government comes up with two policies where one for exporters and one for local companies. But we have to be ready for this possibility. Why hand over South African rands to euros? That's out of our control.
Yep, I think that is the exact moment to leave that particular one, because that is something that we really need to consider. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not we should have any changes as far as our carbon tax goes, but this becomes really a pivotal point in terms of being able to ensure we have the necessary things happening on our side, on the South African side. But while we're here, I have a quick question that has popped up in the Q&A that I think you could actually help with, and that is, what role is played in this by the export-import controls in terms of the data sourcing and validation? I would imagine that they would have more accurate data of what is exported to the EU. And I think maybe that particular question needs to be unpacked a tiny bit to be able to understand the complexities that go into the reporting, being able to actually understand how the carbon emission calculations work as far as the mass balance approach about inputs and outputs, the emissions factors that are utilized, and how we don't have a very comprehensive emissions database in South Africa. And then at the end of it all, once we have done the calculations, we're at a point where it needs to be validated and audited in some way. Crazy help.
Yeah, so Sheila, we're helping one of the large steel companies with their CSRD reporting that Karen mentioned earlier, right? And that's like a huge umbrella to cover all of this. And obviously one part of it helps you to scope 3 emission reporting. And it is very complex. Their external auditors will be auditing the information produced because obviously this EU requires an audit trail to give you the credits back. And it is extremely complex because with this client, even they have quite a high level of maturity, we have needs to collect data from their ERP systems, environmental management systems, every system you can think of, and sensors out in the field to be able to calculate what the actual emissions are. As to your point, you can use the default emissions only as of the last year. From this year onwards, you have to have your own emission factors. And now how you calculate that is extremely complicated. And to what Rosalind said, there's that Excel spreadsheet which some of you may have seen. We have to now comply with this. But the information required in that Excel spreadsheet also has some very sensitive information. You could give away your IP and your competitive advantage in some of those fields you have to fill in there. So what we are seeing our clients doing is they're filling the front sheet, which is how they got their factor, but they're not disclosing exactly how they calculated it, because it's asking for your competitive information, which we're not sure what will happen when it gets into the hands of the EU authorities, because it could give EU companies an advantage over us if they see that kind of information. So there's a lot of complexity around this. Data mapping, data validation, having a system in place, and as Karen said, it can be quite expensive. Our team has been there for the better part of a year. First of all, mapping data, which took over 6 weeks. That's only got us to 90% accurate. And now we're busy collecting the data, putting it into a data platform, and then creating rules around the data so that it can be correctly calculated with the right emissions factor and then pumped into the organization's global platform. So this has, for companies that have headquarters in EU, this applies to them. Anybody exporting, this is becoming very, very complicated. And we're saying CSRD is what I'm talking about is a bigger thing, but Scope 3 is the Excel spreadsheet that you should fill in, is also equally complex. So you need to have a dedicated team. And how does a small business deal with this? Because part of the thing is screws, nuts and bolts and washers and things like that, right? If you are making those kind of things and you're exporting it as part of a finished good into the EU, does a small business have a big team to be able to do all these calculations? Is your supplier giving you the right emissions factors for the materials? And I'm talking about scope 3, although scope 3 is not directly mentioned in CBAM. They talk about electricity. However, if you look at a complex material like a slab of steel, it's got ferromanganese and ferroiron and everything else in it. Those things have to come from another party in your supply chain. The direct and indirect emissions attributable to that goes into your product, and you pay carbon taxes on that. So now what you have to do is, and what most of our clients, you have to understand what your scope 3 emissions look like and have conversations with your suppliers to say, how do they bring down their emissions to help reduce your emissions? It's going to be very complicated.
Oh, no doubt. Rosalind, how does this inspire you in terms of preparing? I know that from discussions with Hulamin, it was a 2-year journey just to put their systems in place. You're a tiny bit ahead of the game, especially because it has not yet been announced in terms of your particular sector. But how are you navigating the space, especially because of the description that Vinesh gave, that it really is about collaboration within your supply chain as well?
Sure. So we're working quite a bit on what's sitting within our control. We do have a scope 3 inventory, but we've got one for last year and the year before, and we're currently determining whether we're going to disclose in our integrated reporting suite, which is due to come out in April. We have, however, gone for a full ESG audit this year, excluding scope 3, which is quite interesting. And it's the first year that we've done it, including all of our safety data. There's some governance information. There's CSI. So we've broadened our audit scope in preparation, and we're hoping that that's going to get us ready. We've also started getting scope 3, and scope 3 is a challenge for us because the business is so diverse. We've got some 40 operations in sub-Saharan Africa, and the way that we run them is they all run as individual P&L centers. So there's a large degree of autonomy in terms of supplier choice and customer management. So it means that sometimes we might be supplying Joburg customers from a Cape Town-based factory, which obviously gives you quite a lot of footprint on your transport. Also being a recycling company, recycling by its very nature is a high volume, low margin business where you have to move tons and tons of material around the country from where it's collected to where it's actually going to be taken into new goods. But what we've done and what we've been doing, we've been on this journey for years. We work very hard on energy efficiency and resource efficiency. So by 2020, we went 15% below the 2012 baseline. And we did that both on CO2 emissions and gigajoules per ton production. And by 2027, we'll go another 15% below the 2019 baseline. So we're going to continue driving continuous improvement, taking those resource efficiency wins, reducing waste. These are the best projects that you're going to get. Usually they're coming in under a 3-year payback. Would absolutely encourage you to look at them. Sometimes you think you've done everything, but you just need to start looking deeper. Stop looking facility level, start going sub-distribution board level, process level, machine level. There's always more optimization that can be done, and there's great returns that go there. And also to be mentioned here is 12L, our one option where there is some revenue recycling of the carbon tax money into energy efficiency and driving energy efficiency. You can get 95 cents for every kilowatt hour that you save. You can only do it for a year. You can do it retrospectively, but then you need to open your tax returns, which can sometimes be something that you might not want to do, especially as large companies with complex returns. So it does bear looking at, but we find we use it mostly for our bigger projects, and we've had some huge successes. For example, with our resource efficiency at our biggest paper mill in Springs, we drove over 15% reduction in coal on our boilers, because we make a lot of steam for the boilers. It's very important for our paper process. And we had a great 12-hour benefit there. We went through the process. You need an accredited SANUS MFV professional, but it's achievable. It's possible. And I'd very much encourage companies to do that. As well as that, we've got some very large renewable energy build. We think we're one of the few manufacturing companies that actually can do design, procurement, and execution in-house. We just have contract labor that comes in to help build some of our systems. We only do this for our large facilities, our paper mills, where we have sort of over 1,000 staff. And initially, the idea came when we had CapEx open and there was an energy shortage in China and there was no solar panels available anywhere, and the price ran. We didn't want to let the project go, so we thought, let's see what we can do. We even thought we'd try and build it ourselves with spare capacity, but looking at that, it doesn't really work, because your electricians, your project managers, your engineers, they're like 80-90% busy. And if we did it with sort of our own spare capacity and spare resourcing, probably would have taken us a year to build, whereas bringing in people, we build in sort of 1 to 3 months. So we have that. Of our total grid connected demand of 50 megawatts, we've already got 16 megawatts solar PV. We'll be over 20 by the end of this financial year. And we're going to 25 megawatts behind our meters by 2027. We also wheel across the grid. We've not elected to take the renewable energy certificates as yet, because there is some discussion around it, and that's also one of the big questions with CBAM, whether you can take any of your RECs into the CBAM process and system to reduce your liability on Scope 2. And as of the workshop that happened a few weeks ago, the answer was no. But as Karen says, they are looking to put more information out, and also picking up on a little bit of Vanessa's point. I heard in the industry task team for climate change today that they're maybe going to go for a bit of a Pareto 80-20, where they're only going to focus on sort of the large exporters, the large companies get 80% of the impact, and then take some of the reporting burden away from, as you say, these small guys that are doing nuts and bolts. So that makes a lot of sense as well. And then we exploring offsets. The South African market for carbon offsets is very, very short. So we're looking at making our own. Interestingly, with waste being out of the tax net and us being a large recycler, we've looked at that quite a lot, but it's very hard to make those economics work. You need very, very good supply chain control, and you need everybody to give up the carbon benefits along the way. Where when we start engaging with people, even though we're paying them for their recyclables and there's been no additional benefit to date, when we're saying like we're going to try and do this, they're saying, oh no, but like they want some of it. And even with us having all of the carbon benefits, I'm paying for the international validators and auditors with that R1 million a pop fee, because of all of them being sort of internationally based, and the travel to get into South Africa. It just doesn't make sense. So we're looking at making some offsets for ourselves with our small scale behind the meter work. Again, don't want to say everything, but I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you want me to touch on anything I might have missed.
Actually, I think that's fantastic. A lot of times the conversation around CBAM has really about the regulatory tick box. What are you doing in terms of reporting? What are you doing in terms of calculating your emissions? That we get so caught up in the process, we don't think about what's actually going into it and the rationale behind it. And I think the fact that your description went around what you're doing in terms of decarbonizing and reducing your footprint is the key message other companies should be able to take on board. If you want to be able to stay competitive, and especially with the CBAM certificates being introduced shortly, we do land up in a situation where competitiveness will be one of the key questions. But I also saw that there was a question that popped up regarding energy. And I was wondering, Karen, if you could maybe weigh in on this one, especially because the Western Cape government has a plan as far as the clean energy mix goes. But I do see a hand from Khotso, and I'm thinking that he probably wants to weigh in from a DEDAT perspective. Khotso, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sheila. Maybe I was just jumping the gun a little bit. I just saw that the question was directed to DEDAT, so maybe I just wanted to touch on that before allowing Karen an opportunity just to expand on that as well. I'm sure we're all aware of the fact that South Africa is busy developing the Just Energy Transition investment plan. So the Western Cape is actually developing its own investment plan, JIP, probably the first province in the country to do so. So the intention is to basically accelerate the province's shift to a low carbon, sustainable, and a climate resilient economy, while addressing critical energy and socioeconomic challenges. So as part of South Africa's broader Just Energy Transition strategy, what we're trying to do is basically just outline a comprehensive approach to decarbonization, um, to infrastructure development and socioeconomic inclusion. So this initiative aligns with the national and global goals of basically achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and also supporting a just transition for communities and workers affected by the energy transition. So the transition to renewable energy and green technologies obviously requires substantial capital investments in key sectors, such as renewable energy generation, green hydrogen production, energy storage, and EVs, to mention a few. Additionally, it also involves the development of technical skills, the expansion of manufacturing capabilities in green industries, and the advancement of energy infrastructure. So addressing these financing needs involves basically leveraging a diverse array of financial instruments, including but not limited to debt, equity grants, guarantees, and innovative mechanisms like green bonds and blended finance. So as part of this framework, we have a pillar that is specific. That specifically focuses on project financing and investment options, which basically is going to be mapping out potential financial instruments to bridge the investment gaps. So this phase also provides a clear methodology for identifying investment-ready projects, and also engaging with key financial stakeholders, including public and private sectors, DFIs as well, and international climate funds. It also it's also going to be emphasizing the need for structured sort of approach to assessing the technical, financial, and environmental readiness of projects, ensuring they're aligned with the JIP's objectives while being attractive to investors. I think in addition to this, our colleagues from Westgrow have also been organizing green energy summits over the past 2 to 3 years, which is really intended to like these initiatives are basically just intended to match green technology project developers with funding. So this is basically just some examples of the concerted efforts that the province is initiating to decarbonize the economy, and I think maybe it's opportune time for me just to also mention that we're busy organizing an investment summit scheduled to take place sometime in November. And one of the themes is focusing on the green economy. So we are quite focused on trying to decarbonize the economy. We are trying to try to incorporate sustainability in most of the projects that we're initiating throughout the province. And it's really a transversal effort. It's not just DEDAT, but I think it's something that's being done by most departments. Thanks, Jeshila.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Khotso. I think that actually gives the nice grounding. And that was actually the question that I was going to pose to Karen, to be able to say what is happening from a Western Cape perspective. I see your hand, Vinesh, but I realize we only have a few minutes left. So I'd like you to maybe comment on that in your wrap-up, right? So I do have some questions for each one of you. And I'll tell you the questions up front, and then we'll go in order from there. So Toma, if you can actually just give us a quick update, what are the top 3 changes that we need to know that's on the horizon as far as CBAM goes? Because we do understand that it's, especially the EU one, in a state of flux, especially as we come closer to the definitive phase, there's more and more pushback that's coming into it and the realization of the practicalities. And then Karen, couldn't get my energy question in there, but I do actually want to know from your perspective, especially as being the investment arm that you are, what can local businesses expect in terms of support as far as networks, etc., from that side, to also stay updated and proactive as far as this particular part goes. Vinesh, I'm not sure if you wanted to lean into one of the questions on the Q&A, which is about the CBAM energy attribute certificates. It's something that I definitely desperately wanted to address because I think it's a very important point. And then finally, Rosalind, if you would maybe just give us a soundbite to say what are practical steps, both short-term and long-term, that businesses absolutely need to do within the next 12 months. All right? Happy with that? Let's go. Everyone has about a minute.
Thanks, Jeshila. Yeah, so from the latest developments in the space is that, and I think even this year, we know that this year is the last year for the transition period ending, in December. And from what we know is that as the transitioning period comes to an end, we also expect the detailed assessment to be done by the European Commission, especially, highlighting the lessons learned from the reporting of GHG emissions during the transition period. But of course, I think the latest development as we've seen there's a big party in Europe called the European People's Party that has actually put forward some proposals on extending the implementation period of the EU CBAM. So the implementation is supposed to come next year, but then they're saying that they should be postponed by 2 years. Of course, there has been a lot of debates, especially coming from industry associations, all over the world, and some firms that will be impacted, as well as governments, to say that the postponement is creating uncertainty. Others are saying is a good indication for for firms to also start preparing. I think from my side personally, I will think that is a good thing, because that's what we've been pushing from the South African perspective, that we need the transition period to be extended so that it allows firms to prepare very well. And the latest thing, another, which is the last thing, is that I think this week or sometime last week, we were actually today we're expecting the first omnibus package batch from the European Commission, and as part of that, I think, I'm not sure if it was Karen, she did mention that there were some other regulations like the corporate, what do you call them, CC. So it's a long acronym, right? So as part of that, the main theme of that is to simplify the reporting process from firms, right? And and there was a leak of the draft, and the draft is actually highlighting a few adjustments, and some of the 3 adjustments, hopefully today this becomes official from from the statements and the likes, is that there has been a change in the minimum threshold. Of course, I think maybe if we have time later on, maybe, I don't know when, but there should be a need to start engaging on the threshold. From my side, I feel like there's nothing changed there. So they actually changed the threshold to 350 pounds, for exports into the EU to around 50 tons. I think it's still the same thing. Then there's been a change in scope, so they just only removed one component of the cement. And in the South African case, we've seen that cement is not impacted that much. And the last one, of course, is the postponement. So they propose in the draft, the leaked draft, that the CBAM implementation phase should be postponed to 2027. So instead of start paying the CBAM charges next year, then we'll start paying from 2027. Then hopefully, if this becomes official, because it's a leaked draft, that I think maybe there won't be much changing. Once the proposal is actually published. So I think I just wanted to just highlight that we have to be on the lookout for the official proposal from the European Commission on these proposals and responding to some of the debates in the space. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Vinesh? Oh, sorry, Karen. I forgot the order. Please go ahead.
Okay, 1 minute. For financing issues, you're very welcome to get in touch with us. So our investment team also works with businesses that are domestic businesses that require access to financing for investment, for expansion. For green financing specifically, we work very closely with Green Cape, and they have a green finance desk where they also facilitate access to green financing options. So please get in touch in that instance. Just in terms of what the Western Cape has been doing, I think just to add on to Khotso's very comprehensive explanation, I think important to know, this hasn't just happened. There's been proactive work being done since sort of the early 2000s in terms of creating, for instance, Green Cape, which is a agency, our sister agency, which really looks at the policy space, tries to work with businesses, works back with government, tries to create a conducive policy environment for all of the investment into the transition that's needed. And we've seen a lot of that playing off with the Western Cape government sort of really being ready for this transition, despite the fact that there are obviously a lot of issues still that need to be flagged out. It's not an easy process, the whole energy transition. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Just get it. Yeah, please do get in touch if you have issues. And I think Jeshila will obviously this project will go forward in terms of figuring out the type of support that is needed. I think that's the whole purpose. So let us know, please.
Absolutely. Vinesh?
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I see we're out of time. So just the point I wanted to bring up was about the energy, right? So we have a huge opportunity because we got so much renewable energy potential in South Africa, but the constraint is Eskom. They need to build 14,000 kilometers of transmission lines to allow people to access this green energy and wheel it across the grid like Rosalind is doing. So there's a low-hanging fruit where if we all can get behind that, that has a spin-off of also helping build our steel industry as well, because we can make all of that, those wiring in South Africa and create more jobs. So something that we need to try and drive and help Eskom get right quickly. The point about your CBAM certificates, this is an illustrative example. 250,000 tons of steel, crude steel being imported into Europe, will attract $36 million of tax at normal calculations. That is the quantum that you're looking at. And then you can subtract your local taxes from that. That's just around, the ETS is even worse, it's $109 million. You do a rough calculation on 750,000 of that. So 1 million tons of steel combined with ETS and CBAM is a significant $143 odd million. So this is not small money we're talking about, and that's why everybody needs to take it very, very seriously. I'll pause there, and for now, thank you.
Excellent. That is a fantastic way to end that. Rosalind?
Sure, very quickly. Understand your energy, understand your carbon, take all opportunities for energy efficiency and resource energy. Green your electricity as much as possible, but be careful not to over procure or understand exactly what you're over procuring, because at the moment we're buying on power purchase agreements that are take or pay. Look for offsets wherever possible, drive your emission reductions, fuel switching, new technology, battery energy storage is coming faster than we think. Keep your eye on hydrogen, it's not there yet, but all of these things come very slowly and then very quickly.
Perfect. Love it. That was incredibly practical in terms of what it is that we need to do. And I think that's what we need a lot of at the moment. So thank you so much for that side. We are officially out of time. In fact, we're over time at the moment. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of my panelists. Really, the passion that you have for the work that you're doing, the clear understanding in terms of what's happening as far as CBAM goes, it really is something that came across very clearly, but it also made it very clear that there's still a lot that needs to be done within this space for us to be able to be prepared as businesses to be able to actually engage within this space. I'll leave you with these quick notes in terms of the compliance guide. Essentially, we need to determine whether CBAM is applicable to you or not. We need to be able to be in a position to report on embedded emissions. We need in the future, whenever this is, either 26 or 27, purchase carbon certificates as a consequence of this, the CBAM certificates. We need to develop our reporting systems. And finally, we need to engage our suppliers. Lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities within there if we are effectively utilizing greener technologies to be able to engage with this. On the screen at the moment is the invitation for our second webinar. We'll try to be a little bit better on time, but thank you so much everyone for your active participation. Really appreciate it. Have a good day further. Thanks. Bye.